But every town in West Cork is no different. Look, let's face it, drugs is a scourge, nationally, and every village and town has that. And indeed, this morning, I'm glad to say, even take a small village like Inchigeelagh, there was 21,000 euros worth of cannabis got there last night in the search.
Hello and welcome to the Southern Star's Coronavirus podcast. I'm the news editor, Siobhan Cronin, and this week's podcast is a wide-ranging interview with the Chief Superintendent of the Cork West Garda Division, Caheragh native Con Cadogan. We talk about policing during COVID, a drop in burglaries but a rise in domestic violence crimes, the new technology that the division is piloting, the huge increase in drug detections, and big plans for the division coming down the tracks. So good morning, Chief Superintendent, and welcome to the Southern Star podcast. Now, West Cork wouldn't be seen as the busiest division in the country, I wouldn't imagine, but you have an awful lot still going on and a lot to keep everyone on their toes. Could you tell me what are the top three priorities now you see in the division at the moment?
Well, I suppose, Siobhan, the top three from a policing perspective, I suppose number one is drugs and the drug abuse in the community. Number two is the fear of crime by our communities out there. And number three would be domestic related crime. And, those are probably set early on each year. We bring in our stakeholders who set our targets and who set our focus for the next year in terms of policing. And indeed, in West Cork, we're very fortunate. We have a group of 20 people from various sectors of society in West Cork who come in every year and assist us, and we obviously do a bit of brainstorming with them. And in the last 12 months, actually, those were the three key areas that have been identified by those selection of people from throughout the community, which goes from Castletownbere down to Kinsale.
How do you choose those people? Or how did they get picked?
I suppose some of them have been community activists, some have been involved in take, for example, we have people from the IFA, we have people from the business community, we have people from the legal profession. And we have a cross-section, both public and people out in communities and that. And they feed into us what they see as, the requirements and what they see as challenges in communities. And that has been very helpful. And indeed, next week, we're actually doing Zoom calls with each of those in smaller groups, obviously, because we normally would have breakout groups and do brainstorming with them. And it's amazing, actually, with what they come up with, as they see, the perceived threats, I suppose, maybe out in the communities and that, and what they feel communities want. And that is how we set our goals for our policing plans for next year.
And is that a common strategy in other divisions, or is that unique to West Cork, that community involvement?
We were probably one of the first in the country. Our new Garda Commissioner, I suppose, asked for that, a big input from communities out there and, community engagement. And certainly, we had, I suppose, the processes in place, set that up pretty quickly because we have a very strong bond out in the community through community alerts, neighbourhood watches, Minta Natira, and various support groups out there. And it was easy to bring it together.
Right. Now, you have spoken before about, burglaries are well down in West Cork, especially compared to other divisions, but you touched there yourself on one of the priorities is drugs. And we've seen in particular in the paper in the last year an awful lot of drug seizures and detections, and even in the courts we're seeing them coming through now. And Bantry in particular, and I think there was a little bit of fear maybe in Bantry that they had a major problem, but we had an interview recently with the superintendent there explaining that it's not that so much it's a problem, it's that the policy of detection is very effective and you're finding a lot, and it's probably no different to any other town. So you might just talk us through a little bit about the drugs issue in West Cork and the fact it's not Bantry isn't being particularly targeted or anything.
No, I suppose, Siobhan, look, we change our targets and our focus on a weekly basis. And, it just happens that certainly, we would have picked maybe a district for 6 weeks and go in with the local Gardai there. We have a divisional drugs unit, obviously, which has been reorganised the last 2 years. We have an inspector now who's in charge of it. We have a new detective sergeant. There are a number of new people in the drugs unit. And indeed, they work with the local district drugs unit. And there are 2 members in Bantry, actually, in that unit as well. And obviously, drugs is a murky game. It's, you're depending a lot on intelligence and information in that. And indeed, I suppose the community have come in behind us as well there. And you have the domino effect. I think once you get in amongst anything, no matter what it is, one thing leads on to the next. And that scenario has developed in Bantry. Look, there are a lot of Section 3s detections there. There are a lot of drug drivers.
You might just explain what a Section 3 is, Chief Supt.
Section 3 is personal use, small amounts and that. And, obviously there would be a number of those detections. But every town in West Cork is no different. Look, let's face it, drugs is a scourge, nationally, and every village and town has that. And indeed, this morning, I'm glad to say, even in take a small village like Inchigeela, there was 21,000 euros worth of cannabis got there last night in the search. So that just puts it in perspective. It has no boundaries, end up anywhere. But look, each of the towns in West Cork, I suppose, have come to the forefront. We're working very closely with all the local members out in those stations, and it just happens that Bantry now seems to be the first town, I suppose, and a lot of us coming to the forefront before the courts and that. And that wouldn't be possible.
Sorry, with the fact that we're a coastal area and, an awful lot of very hard to detect coves and little inlets, has that much of an effect on then what filters through to the coastal towns like Bantry or Kinsale?
Look, I suppose we're working very closely with Customs and with the Naval Service. We meet regularly every month. There are monthly meetings between our Divisional Drugs Unit and obviously the representatives from, the other two sister agencies, as we refer to. In that front, we share intelligence, we share information, is working together. And look, over the last 2 years, that has served us well down here. I suppose with the COVID restrictions at the moment, any of the dealers, change their ways and how they bring in drugs as well. And obviously, to be very naive of us, not to watch that and watch those trends as well. And we're working on that. For example, you have less planes now, less flights in and out of airports. So, your seaports obviously have to become a priority. Obviously, your coastline has become a priority. The other thing as well, we have noticed is a huge increase in cultivation and homegrown. And certainly, that's an area obviously we're monitoring as well very closely in that. But, you depend a lot on intelligence and on information as well. The community out there have been excellent throughout West Cork and indeed throughout the country in reporting drugs or anything suspicious, and we depend very much on that. And I appreciate that, in West Cork, we got tremendous support from the local people. And I think if the locals trust the local community guard or trust the local sergeant or whatever, that they can pick up the phone in confidence, pass on that bit of information or that bit of intelligence, it may be a small part of a jigsaw. And, I've seen it here in West Cork. Like in Cork County this year, I think there's very close on 3 million euros worth of drugs seized in the county, which is, no small feat. And quite a lot of those have come from maybe the smaller dealers. And I know from Section 15, which is dealing drugs, we actually have a 50% increase in the first 9 months this year, and that in West Cork Division.
And that's detection, of course, so not to worry people that it's just reflecting the detection rather than the
detection of drugs. And I suppose it reflects, activity, and, that Garda Síochána are very proactive in the drugs field. And, thankfully, we're having a lot of success out there. But again, that's back to communities and back to everybody supporting it. Like a police force is only as strong as the community that supports it as well. And when the community supports you, you can get quite a lot done.
Well, just speaking of community support now, one thing that we have noticed with the increase in usage of social media is that there's actually quite a lot of pushback as regards the detections of small amounts of what you call Section 3 cannabis usage for personal usage. And you see a lot of comment online about, have the guys nothing better to do? This is just people having a smoke. It's not affecting anyone. Alcohol is, causes more damage to families. And it's a kind of a trend I've noticed in the last 5 or 6 years that there's quite a growing contingent out there of people who think that obviously that cannabis should be legalized. Like, is there any softening in the courts or anything towards that, or in legislation terms, do you think, coming down the line?
I don't think so, Siobhan. I suppose, look, if you look at the whole drug scene globally, again, a lot of crime, can be traced back to drugs. You have some people who obviously commit crime to feed the habits. Others, commit crime under the influence of drugs. Look, we have got to learn from other countries as well. Take Holland. Over the last number of years, we work very closely with a lot of other European police forces. And I was fortunate enough to be on a policing forum with some of the Dutch police, and they tried legalizing drugs back in the 80s and the 90s. And they discovered, over the last 10 years, it has created a lot of problems for them. They have additional people living in parks, living homeless. It certainly didn't work for those people, and didn't work in Holland for them and that. And I think if they had their time back again, they'll reconsider their actions back in the 80s and the 90s.
And I suppose the comment that, and I know I've seen the judges in the area make this comment several times, is that it might just be cannabis, if you want to use that term, but that an awful lot of the cannabis is connected in some way or other to the harder drugs, or you might have the same dealers, or one may lead to another, or certainly the funding. If you're funding the cannabis trade, you're indirectly funding a much more sinister trade. So, I mean, would you agree with that argument?
Certainly, and look, that certainly was the learning experience as well. And I mentioned Holland there, that it led to harder drugs, it led to more serious crime. The other thing of interest, it led actually to problems in the workplace, where people were, rather than maybe coming in smoking a cigarette, would be smoking a joint. And you had, personal safety of people at work came into, speak at that stage as well. And
productivity, probably, no doubt, as well, was an issue for the government.
Absolutely. And, there was a lot of other issues that came into play. So, look, it's very hard to argue, for it, when you take everything into account from a global aspect.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned to me recently that you have some new technology at checkpoints now for detection, and it sounds quite interesting. Can you talk us through some of that?
Yes, Siobhan, we have what we refer to as the mobility units now. They're basically a mobile phone, and indeed, I even have got complaints here where members of the public are ringing in and saying, has the guard anything better to be doing at a checkpoint than playing on his mobile phone? But in essence, actually what the Gardai are doing, they're reading the number plates of the cars as they come up to the checkpoint. They can tell exactly who you are, who owns the car, and in a lot of instances, we wave on people at checkpoints because we know exactly who they are and that they're local and that as well. And I suppose the other side of it as well, to tell you immediately if a car is not insured, or if, there's no tax on the car, the phone actually you would have it set to vibrate in your hand, so you know exactly. So it's very easy to detect, people with uninsured cars, untaxed cars, and indeed you have cars coming up to checkpoints with false number plates on them.
Okay, so the phone will vibrate if there's something untoward, and it's kind of a little alert, is it, for the garda to say, hang on here, now let's stop and check? Exactly,
and like people you probably have seen it yourself, you'll see a line of 10 cars coming along, and the next thing, all of a sudden, you see the guard pulling one car out of the 10, and people are wondering, why did they pull him over? So they have the information already, so they know exactly from the technology who the person is, or the car is untaxed or uninsured. And look, I suppose it's something out there. It's to everybody's benefit. I think everybody complains about the amount of uninsured drivers out there. In West Cork Division so far this year, we probably have about 800 cars seized for either no tax or no insurance and taken off the roads. And that's all. I think. And
is that up on other years, Chief Super?
It's because of the technology. Yes, there's no doubt about it. I suppose we have seen plenty of it out there. You've seen it yourself in the courts, where people can, with modern computers now, you can actually create a tax disc very easy and generate it and print it off and put it up on the car. And with the naked eye, it can be very difficult to detect. But with the mobility units now, basically, we know straight away if it's showing a tax disc for December 2020 and there's no tax in the car, straight away from the mobility app, because the mobility app national vehicle file is updated on a daily basis. So before the guard goes out on duty, they can basically dock the phone. In the matter of a couple of minutes, the national vehicle file is updated. So they know they have the most current and available information from the local taxation offices, from the local registration offices, and obviously that includes insurance details and that as well.
And so, how far does that information detection go? Is it just for motoring offences, or if I was wanted in another country, would that come up as well, or wanted for a more serious offence?
It certainly can, and I suppose you take, for example, if there's a high alert on a car, as often happens, where we have maybe a car that's involved in serious crime. We feed it on the system. It's automatically uploaded now onto the mobility units as well. And the minute that car approaches the checkpoint, again, it'll set off an alarm, and guard can see exactly what this car is wanted for a serious crime, wanted for a serious sexual offence, or for a robbery or whatever. And again,
sorry, you did mention it was a pilot scheme to me. Is that will be brought in countrywide for every guard on a checkpoint, will it?
It certainly will. I think at this stage, in my staff in West Cork, where somewhere around 50% of members have them. So, and that will be increased. All our roads policing unit, have that technology, as indeed have some of our cars as well have it. So, once we park up a car, we can see exactly. You can see crime trends. You can see what vehicles are traveling in convoys. There's quite a lot of analytical work you can actually do background afterwards. If you have a serious crime or whatever, you can see a pattern of cars. And, obviously it can be very helpful in serious investigations.
Right. Now, you mentioned there about someone maybe wanted for domestic violence or sexual assault. We have a protective service unit now in the region, which we were looking for, I think, for quite some time. I know the West Cork Women Against Violence were lobbying for it for quite a while, that women or other victims of sexual violence didn't have to go to Cork for the investigation. So how is that working out now? And tell me a little bit about that.
We have set up the Protective Services Unit commenced last year on the 30th of December. There are 2 detective sergeants, 10 detective Gardai gone into it in Dunmanway. They're an extremely busy unit. I suppose domestic related crime has increased by 5% this year in the Cork West area.
Just give me that figure again, because we lost you there for a second.
It's increased by 25% this year in Cork West Division. There's probably a number of reasons for that. As well as number one, you have the new unit who works very closely, and indeed you mentioned the West Cork Women Against Violence, who do tremendous work out in the community. You have the Cork Rape Crisis Centre, you have other voluntary support groups. It works very closely with TUSLA, because obviously there are children involved, and indeed with the HSE. And, there are weekly meetings between each of those agencies, and indeed with the voluntaries, in respect of supports that can be provided. So in that front, I suppose there's it's a very professional unit, completely dedicated to the domestic related crime. But when you mention domestic crime, I suppose, it's very important to clarify that automatically think it's husband and wife or between partners, but it has a much broader remit in that it could be a son or a daughter or a father or a mother or siblings, and domestic violence can be very complex at times as well, I suppose, in that sense, and to see who the perpetrator is or what the underlying reasons are for, the particular crime. And the other side of it, I suppose, we have brought in what we call callbacks, where members actually have basically go back to the victim, and we go back maybe on a number of occasions as well. And we record that on our systems now as well. And obviously we, provide relevant information on what orders they can get from the courts, be it a protection order, be it a barring order, or indeed, if there's something needs to be investigated, and to give reassurance to those people. Many instances, they need other supports as well, because they may have to leave the family home. And West Cork Women Against Violence, who are at the forefront there, and maybe provide temporary accommodation. And it's about each of the agencies working together. And I'm glad to say that the unit in Dunmanway is working extremely well. Their workload has increased significantly. There's no doubt about that. A lot of the cases now that they have started, back in January, are starting to come before the courts. And I suppose the other thing as well is that we have become a lot more efficient. Like, each of those cases now are investigated rapidly. And you have people with expertise in there who've undergone, I suppose, intense training in that field. And they know exactly, what to do and what not to do in given circumstances.
So can I just ask you, in the case of a sexual assault, prior to this, I suppose you could have expected that if you made the call, you were heading to Cork for medical examination and for investigation and all the rest. So if a victim rings now and says they're a victim of sexual assault, is the whole process dealt with in West Cork, or does the medical end of that still have to be dealt with in Cork City?
The medical aspect has to be dealt at the SATU unit, the Sexual Assault Treatment Unit in Cork City. And the Protective Services Unit obviously will take it from start to finish now. They are provided with a number of cars and transport. So the victim is taken from start to finish, and if there are supports needed, obviously, they're brought in at an early stage as well. The treatment unit in the city, I suppose, is probably fully kitted out. There are dedicated medical staff, in there who are properly trained in that field, who show great empathy and support. And indeed, if there are additional supports needed, they're in a position as well to work with the PSU and ensure those supports are made available. But it's a centre of excellence in the medical field and that's why as well you have a limited number of those medical centres throughout the country. I know it can be very hard on the victim, and I can empathise with that. But on the other side, I think the supports and anybody that has gone through it will tell you, and even if you talk to the West Cork Women Against Violence, they can appreciate as well how it operates. But I suppose the very important thing is, that's just the examination side. It's the after support and the aftercare that's more important to the victim. And with the Protective Services Unit, they're on daily contact, and indeed with the victim as well, as was, which is vitally important now. Every action that's taken by that unit, they will actually come back to the victim and say, we've done A, B, and C. This is where we're at. Or the file has gone to the DPP. There are charges, and what to expect. And I think that's vital for any victim, that they're kept fully informed of
Absolutely.
what actions are taken and what the outcome is going to be, and when the outcome comes out.
So basically, you're not left, like very much the feeling in the past was you were on your own a lot of that time. Once you make that call, you won't be left on your own. You will be accompanied to Cork, I presume, for examination. Oh, yeah. And also, I suppose it's just worth making the point, it's not exclusively for women. If men are victims, they also should make that call, and they will get treated equally.
That is correct, yes. And look, the best of support will be provided, and I suppose those linkages are there now. As I've explained, each of those units, be it voluntary or statutory, meet now on a weekly basis, and it cuts through all the red tape. In the past, and there was probably a lot of written communication, and as you know, that can slow down processes, whereas now it's verbal, the phones are picked up. Each of those, my staff inside in Dunmanway would have the personal phone numbers of all the support agencies, of all the statutory agencies as well, all the mobile phones and relevant numbers, so that immediate help can be accessed. And it's taken very seriously, and investigated very quickly, very efficiently, and every available support is provided. And I think that's why our numbers have increased as well, Siobhan. There's confidence out there with people now that they feel they can come forward in confidence. They'll be listened, very important, that they're listened to. Their complaint is taken very seriously and taken on board and fully investigated.
And can you dial directly into that unit, Chief Supt, or do you just, if you feel you want to make a complaint, do you ring your local garda station, or do you dial 9? Like a lot of people don't know, they've never happened to them before and they don't know what to do. Do you ring 999? Do you ring your local garda station, or do you look up the number for the unit in Dunmanway?
You can actually call into your local station. You can ring the local station. You can actually ring Dunmanway station, and you will be, if a complaint comes into any station in West Cork, be it Skibbereen or Clonakilty or wherever, the local sergeant there actually will be referring that file immediately and contacting his colleagues or her colleagues inside in the Protective Services Unit, and they will immediately take over that case. Obviously, the local super will do a quick triage on it and say, yes, it's a case for the PSU. And that because as well, we're very conscious that it's the relevant cases in there because they have such a heavy workload, that's why we're very, I suppose, particular that it's domestic related and it's put in there for the right reasons.
Right. Now, you touched a little bit on the fact that the figures have gone up, and there has been a lot of publicity in the national media even about the figures having risen because of COVID. Now, how has COVID affected the Gardai? Because we're not hearing very much about, cases of it, or how are bubbles working, or how do you social distance? I suppose the only way that the public interact is that you see the Gardai at checkpoints with masks on. But it must be a very difficult job to carry out with such tight restrictions at the moment.
It certainly has been, and as well, we're very fortunate here, and I know I'm touching wood here now, that no member of the Garda staff or any sworn member in Garda Síochána in West Cork has got COVID so far since the start. We've, a clean bill of health, and indeed this morning, we have quite a number of people who went for tests, obviously because there was scares and, through contact elsewhere and whatnot. But thankfully, everybody has come back clear, which is down to, as was the professionalism of the members and then and how they deal with it. We have what we call a buddy system in the cars, where you're basically, a lot of the guys are since last March with the same person. We have one-way systems in station, units coming in and going off. We basically have asked them not to meet. So the new unit coming in comes in one door, the unit finishing are gone out another door, and we don't, encourage any contact. If they need to speak to each other, they do it on phone. That certainly has helped us a lot. I suppose the other thing with our cars, we have quite a lot of transport in West Cork, and the drivers of those cars actually, when they finish duty, they have wipes and they have sanitizer, and they basically have to clean down the whole cockpit in the car. It has to be done before they leave the car. And that's something, as well, even the Garda representative, GRA and AGSI, have been very strong in here in West Cork as well for the protection of their members, protection of families, and that as well, that is done. Thankfully, it has served us well. And I suppose the other area is prisoners. We have 4 detention areas, in West Cork. And in order to reduce the risk, we have 2 of those closed at the moment. So we're using 2 main centres, which are Bantry, obviously, and Bandon. And in the event of we, God forbid, do get an outbreak, obviously, we have plan B in place where we can open one of the others and close the one if we have an outbreak.
Right.
So obviously we have those risk assessments done. We review those on a daily basis. And that has served us well in that regard.
Right. And now there are some big changes coming down the tracks for the Cork West Division. There's an amalgamation coming. And the likelihood, I think, is that the HQ may be in Macroom, which also means a long overdue revamp for the station there. So maybe tell us a little bit about that. What's happening with the division in the next few years?
I suppose, like everybody is aware, that there was a commission set up by government back about 3 years ago to carry out a review of the future of policing in Ireland under former police commissioner from New York, Kathleen O'Toole, whom everybody is aware of. One of the recommendations that was setting up is what we term an operating model. And in what the operating model means, I suppose, is that you have functionalities. Rather than being area specific, now it's functionality specific. And there are 3 key areas in that. You have basically the business functional area in Garda Síochána, which is finance. You have the governance, which covers obviously auditing, risk management, policing plans, and the courts. And then you have the community engagement aspect, which is dealing with the community. Cork County will be amalgamated. We don't have dates on that, but it won't affect frontline policing per se. It's obviously the management structure is changing into functions and that. And I suppose what you'll know is your local superintendent may no longer be covering a bigger area. You will have a superintendent, but they'll have a larger area, but they will be completely devoted to, say, community engagement. Or you'll have maybe just one superintendent in the county completely responsible for serious crime.
But I don't want to put the fear in anyone that there's going to be a reduction in numbers because of an expanding division.
No, it actually should lead to an increase in numbers, believe it or not. Cork County, I suppose, has population of 297,000 people. We have approximately 13,000 kilometres of road network. Currently, between Cork North and Cork West, there are a total of 650 Garda. There are total probably about 100 support staff, so that's 750 staff. Again, Cork North, I suppose, which has a base in Fermoy, you're the Chief Supt there. So what will mean is that you'll have one superintendent covering the whole county. That hasn't been announced yet, and indeed, I don't even know if I'll be the Chief Supt for the county or not. At this stage, there are 2 of us currently covering the county, so
you have to fight it out.
That's something for the commissioner to decide on at this stage. So,
and is there a date even in mind for that, do you think?
Currently there's not, but I suppose you mentioned there the station. Certainly the commissioner has identified 2 stations for next year in relation to building of stations, one being Clonmel and the second being Macroom. So look, I suppose we're looking forward to that. The site has been identified in Macroom. The site currently will be fenced off in the next, I believe, 2 weeks. The plans for the station have come out. Superintendent Moore in Macroom has had, I suppose, a huge impact. The design of the station, as indeed have myself and some of my team here, and what our requirements are. We believe the station will cost somewhere in the region of 30 million. It's being built on the same footprint as Wexford and Galway.
Is it close to the existing Garda station?
No, it's further out on the Killarney side of Macroom. It's backing onto the new motorway, and the new fire station is actually onto the same site as indeed are the local authority offices. So I suppose, which is good to see as well, that each of the agencies will be probably on the one side together, and then that certainly will lead to synergies there, I have no doubt, down the road. It backs onto the motorway, so people will be able to get in and out quickly as well. But look, it won't mean a reduction in numbers, it should mean an increase in numbers. And obviously that's something that whoever the chief of the county is will be watching very closely on that. But it won't affect frontline policing. Like I say, it's the management structure that will be changed.
And that's reflected around the country. It's not just unique to Cork, I don't think.
No, it's not. No, it's happening nationally. There are, I suppose, Cork City are probably out at the other side of it at this stage. Limerick are in the process of it. Kerry are starting similar to ourselves. And look, I suppose there will be headaches like anything when you bring in change in that, but I have no doubt that we'll probably make a more efficient force in that as well, and with using modern technology as well. Take the business functionality area. You have a finance officer inside in many, for example, each of the districts. That will amalgamate into one, because with IT now and everything, that can be centralized into one office. And that's only one small aspect to it. That's only just one small area of it, but an important area.
Well, I was going to ask you there about how a new commissioner or a new justice minister affects the day-to-day running, but I suppose we can probably see a little bit there about how a new commissioner affects, because I think that has come down from Commissioner Drew Harris, this new revamped, new look Garda Síochána. Does a new justice minister have much of an impact on day-to-day running, or are you just biding your time till there's another one, because they don't usually last more than a few years in this country?
Well, I suppose, Siobhan, at the end of the day, police force we're an enforcement agency, and we enforce the legislation or enforce the law, as the case may be. Irrespective of who is Minister for Justice or who is Commissioner, once a complaint is made to us, there's an obligation on us to investigate that complaint through to fruition. And that doesn't change. You have the same crime out in communities and that. And, we are a service provider, and, our aim is, I suppose, to make sure that the public are looked after in that respect, and, and to help the communities, and obviously work with communities as well. And I think working with communities is vital. If you get the, a police force working with a local community, and we've touched on it on drugs, that's why we've had the success in drugs, and it's about working very closely with communities, building trust, and that has to happen out there. And look, each of our young members out there as well, we have quite a lot of young people have joined the organisation, indeed here even in West Cork. And, they're very community orientated people coming in, and they understand, policing, back to the basics of policing. It's, can be very complex, but it can be very simple as well, and I suppose make it work. And we learn from that. We learn from mistakes as well. We don't always get it right, certainly. And, even I see at the local COVID checkpoints at the moment, a lot of members of the public may be giving out about it. And indeed, myself, I've often been sitting as well for maybe 10 or 15 minutes until you get through the checkpoint. But at the back of it, you must remember it had a huge impact on crime. And it had an impact on making our communities safer. That people can travel and know that basically crime has reduced significantly. And like it had reduced significantly, and it just goes to show that if you deny criminals the use of our public roads, the impact it can have on communities in making community much safer and taking the fear of crime out, from communities, and that as well.
And on that, I was making the observation to you earlier that society has changed quite a lot in the last few years, and there's kind of a slight rise now in right-wing activism. We see it more in, I suppose, Dublin City and other cities maybe than you do in West Cork, but the whole of society has changed quite a lot in recent years, and there's new challenges for Gardai, and, communities becoming more diverse. do you feel the training regime in Templemore is taking account of that, and that the Gardaí, the new Gardaí as you call them, and the young new Gardaí, are able to cope with very different challenges now to what, their previous generations of Gardaí would have dealt with?
I think most certainly, yes. Like, you have different, I suppose, nationalities now joining on Garda Síochána. And even take here in West Cork, we have a member here recently joined us, actually, of Indian extraction here in Bandon Station. There are quite a number of the Polish community have joined us. We have quite a number of people from the UK, and even Italy have joined the force in that, and even some of the from Romania have joined the force as well. And they're a very valuable asset. But not alone that, we've trained our own members as well in ethnic liaison, and there are ethnic liaison officers in every division in every district, and indeed covering their, we have sectors basically where members are responsible for from an ethnic point of view. And even in our police planning, believe it or not, we have some of the ethnic groups as well represented on that, which is important to see where they're coming from. And our community Gardaí are, trained as well to a certain level in dealing with the various groupings and that out there. And obviously, we watch trends as well. Like, I know exactly when you mentioned Dublin, and you have a lot of right wing, there's no doubt, it certainly has increased in the past. You see it throughout Europe, but it's I suppose, a global problem currently. And that, but thankfully in West Cork, we don't have that, to that extent. You might have small groupings or whatever. But look, it's something that we monitor very closely. We don't, some of those groups maybe inciting hatred against other groupings in a community, and that as well, and because that is a criminal offence, and that's something we watch very, very closely, and we encourage those minority groups, if they have become the victim of some of this hate crime or whatever, to report it to us, and indeed they have, and we're glad to say that's an area as well as we're working hard on as well. And
onwards and upwards with that. And just a final question I always ask everyone at the end is, if you do get any downtime, and I know that, like myself, the Gardaí have probably never been busier during this pandemic than they were in the past, but what do you do for downtime? I think you're a golfer, am I right?
Well, I suppose I enjoy the odd round of golf. The other thing is I enjoy rugby. I played, I suppose, for a number of years. I played with Greene in my young days, and obviously played senior rugby with Highfield for a number of years. I go to some of the Highfield matches. I'd be watching rugby, and I suppose I enjoy sitting down at the moment and following Munster, and delighted to see such a great cadre of young people from West Cork on the Munster team at the moment. And
are you missing the live matches though?
Yes, and I suppose like the other side of it, watching, all the young lads that are on the Munster team at the moment, I would have played rugby with their dads, and that, I get satisfaction out of that as well. It's great to see that coming from West Cork, and I have no doubt that some of them will meet, will go to the top, in the Irish and indeed probably the international world of rugby, which is good to see. And I think it's good for most importantly for the young people in West Cork, because they will try and epitomise what those guys are doing as well, and probably put them on the right track. And, from a policing perspective, it's very important sport, because that's who your peers are. And, it plays a vital role in diverting people away, maybe from crime or for something else. People may get into the wrong field or get in with the wrong groupings. So sport is very important. And I suppose, look, I enjoy watching sport, no doubt, no different to anybody. And, I enjoy the GA as well, and the hurling and the football, and indeed we'll be watching that over the weekend. And hopefully, from a Cork perspective, being a
Dublin
Cork
won't do too much damage.
Well. Yes.
Well, Chief Superintendent, thank you very much for joining us this week, and best of luck with the policing in the future.
Thanks, Siobhan. Thank you very much.
And so to this week's newspaper. Our lead is the sad story of the Goleen pensioner who was followed home from a shopping trip to Skibbereen by two men. One of the men distracted her with conversation, while the other loaded up one of her rooms with boxes of power tools and chainsaws, none of which she wanted. They intimidated her, and she parted with several €1,000 as a result. But it had a court sequel recently, when both men were jailed at the Cork Circuit Court. We also have the disturbing story of claims of prostitution taking place in broad daylight on the outskirts of Macroom, a claim which local Gardai say they are taking seriously. We also have a rather unusual story of the two druids who came to West Cork recently to help a local farmer move a standing stone. Our main picture is a charming portrait of students of St. Patrick's Boys National School in Skibbereen, which has moved its classes to the enchanting surroundings of Lizard Estate outside the town for a week. Inside the paper, we have news of abandoned house fire on Halloween night, goats that are heading home to Caheragh after helping to clean up a Crosshaven graveyard, and the green light for plans for a modern new play area for Bandon. We also have a story that the council is testing out new bike repair stations for cyclists wanting to do repairs on the go, and we have lots of local news from the courts this week as usual. In features, we have a closer look at what businesses and organisations are going to do to entice shoppers to stay local, and a report into the disappearing dunes in Inchydoney. Our featured property this week is a coastal home in Schull with foreshore access, and in business we have details of the first ever Southern Star sales webinar for firms wanting to reach their full potential. The farming pages reveal the winner of the Southern Star Celtic Ross Hotel Hall of Fame Award, and our life and community front page features a great interview with Beara native John Sullivan, who stars in Gogglebox Ireland. Emma Connolly is making her way through Schitt's Creek in her COVID diary, and Paddy O'Donovan gives you the perfect squat advice in the fitness column. We also have our usual columnists and motoring and sports sections, and local news from every area of West Cork. So don't forget, if you can't get to the shops, you can subscribe online by going to thesouthernstarTV and clicking on the e-paper tab at the top of the screen. Or call the office on 028 212 00 for a postal copy to be sent out to you. And now for this week's musical treat. Greenshine's new single, Don't Mind If I Do, has been getting a lot of radio airplay recently, but the band, comprising Noel Shine, Mary Greene and their daughter Ellie, popped into the Southern Star studio as part of our Southern Star sessions a few years ago to record a song which has since become a major staple of their repertoire, called The Girl in the Lavender Dress. For more on Greenshine, see greenshinemusic.com. Thank you for listening to the Southern Star Coronavirus Podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast, which is available on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Acast, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.